The guest bedroom door clicked shut at 11:47 p.m., and I knew exactly what that sound meant. Again, 3 weeks now since my husband Walter had been sleeping down the hall instead of beside me, and somehow that soft click felt louder than if he'd slammed it. I stared at the ceiling, counting the seconds between his footsteps and the silence, wondering how we'd gotten here. I'm Penelope Coleman, 41 years old, and supposedly living the modern marriage I thought I wanted. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm the one who opened this particular door. But sitting here in our king-size bed that feels cavernous with just me in it, I'm starting to think some doors should stay closed. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. When I first brought up the idea of opening our marriage 8 months ago, I had this vision of sophisticated adults exploring their needs while maintaining the foundation of our 17-year partnership. We'd read articles about ethical non-monogamy, attended that awkward workshop at the community center where everyone sat in a circle and talked about expanding love. I was convinced we were evolved enough to handle it. The truth is, our marriage had been running on autopilot for years. Walter worked his steady job at the telecommunications company, came home, helped with dinner, watched whatever Netflix series I'd picked, and we'd fall asleep to the blue glow of our phones. Weekends meant errands, our daughter Chloe's volleyball games, and the occasional dinner out where we'd discuss the weather and whether we needed new gutters. We were good roommates, excellent co-parents, but lovers. That fire had dimmed to barely glowing embers. I'd been feeling restless for months before I said anything. Not unhappy exactly, but like I was sleepwalking through my own life. At book club, my friend Janet would talk about the spark she still had with her husband after 20 years. And I'd nod along while thinking about how long it had been since Walter looked at me with genuine desire. When had we stopped seeing each other as anything more than partners in domestic management? The conversation finally happened on a rainy Saturday in October. Chloe was at a sleepover, and we'd just finished cleaning up from dinner, when I found myself saying, "Do you ever wonder what it would be like to be with someone else?" Just like that, out of nowhere, though it had been building in my chest for months. Walter looked up from loading the dishwasher, his hand still holding a wine glass. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we've been together since college. Don't you ever wonder about possibility?" He set the glass down carefully, the way he does when he's thinking. Walter has always been deliberate like that, measured. It's one of the things that attracted me to him initially, his steadiness after a series of dramatic relationships in my 20s. Now sometimes that same steadiness felt like stagnation. "Are you asking if I want to see other people?" His voice was neutral, giving nothing away. "I'm asking if you think there might be something out there we're missing. Something that could make us appreciate what we have here even more." We talked until past midnight that first night, and several more times over the following weeks. I presented research I'd done online, articles about couples who'd strengthened their primary relationship through ethical exploration. Walter listened, asked thoughtful questions, voiced concerns about jealousy and time management and what it would mean for Chloe. All practical considerations, which was so typically him. "What if one of us develops feelings?" he asked during one of our kitchen table discussions. "That's what the boundaries are for," I said confidently. "We're not looking for love. We have that. We're looking for excitement, novelty, the kind of energy that makes you remember why you chose this person to come home to." I thought I had it all figured out. We established rules, no overnight dates, always use protection, full disclosure about who we were seeing. And our marriage and family came first, always. We'd schedule date nights weekly to reconnect. And either of us could call a halt to the whole experiment at any time. The first few months went exactly as I'd imagined. I joined a dating app, met a few men for coffee or drinks, had some pleasant conversations and a couple of encounters that reminded me I was still attractive, still desirable. There was Willem, a divorced musician who made me laugh and reminded me what it felt like to be the center of someone's attention. There was Carl, a visiting professor who appreciated my mind as much as anything else. Nothing earth-shattering, but enough to make me feel alive again. Walter seemed to be struggling more with the apps. He'd show me his profile, asking if his photos were okay, if his bio sounded interesting. He got matches, but fewer dates. And the ones he went on seemed to fizzle quickly. I'd come home from my own dates to find him reading or grading papers. He taught high school history, and he'd ask politely about my evening while I shared carefully edited highlights. "How was your night?" became our standard greeting, delivered with the forced casualness of people trying to prove how mature and secure they were. Then Walter met Vivian. I remember the first time he mentioned her name. It was a Wednesday evening in February, and I was making tea when he said, "I'm having dinner with someone Friday. Her name's Vivian." Something in his tone was different, lighter, maybe nervous in a way I hadn't heard from him in years. "That's great," I said, and meant it. I'd been worried he wasn't getting much out of our arrangement, that I was the only one benefiting. "Tell me about her." "She's a librarian at the downtown branch. We matched a few weeks ago, but it took us forever to coordinate schedules. She seems really interesting." Librarian, of course. Trust Walter to find the most wholesome possible person to date. I pictured someone mousy and bookish, probably divorced with cats, grateful for attention from a decent man like my husband. I was happy for him, truly. It would make the whole arrangement feel more balanced. The night of their date, I found myself checking the time more often than usual. Walter had said he'd be home by 10. We'd agreed on reasonable curfews as part of our boundaries, but 10 came and went. Then 11. At 11:30, I texted, "Hope you're having fun. See you when you get home." He didn't respond until almost midnight. "Sorry, lost track of time. Heading home now." When he came in, I was pretending to read in bed, but I could see the change in him immediately. There was an energy I hadn't seen in years, a brightness in his eyes that made my chest tighten unexpectedly. "Good night," I asked, closing my book. "Really good," he said, and started talking about Vivian as he got ready for bed. How she'd recommended a restaurant he'd never tried, how they'd talked about history and discovered they'd both studied abroad in Prague, though at different times. How she'd made him laugh until his sides hurt. I listened and made appropriate sounds of interest while something cold settled in my stomach. This wasn't how his previous dates had gone. Those he'd described in practical terms. Nice woman, pleasant conversation, probably wouldn't see her again. This was different. Over the following weeks, Vivian became a regular presence in our conversations. Walter mentioned articles she'd shared, books she'd recommended, opinions she'd expressed about current events. He started dressing more carefully for their dates, humming while he got ready. When he smiled at his phone, I knew it was because of a text from her. "She sounds lovely," I said one evening, and realized I sounded like I was trying to convince myself. "She is," Walter said simply. "You'd like her." Would I? I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. The first real warning sign came in March. I'd been out with Willem, dinner and a concert that ran late, and came home to find the house dark. Walter's car was in the driveway, but when I checked the guest room, he wasn't there. His bedroom was empty too. It took me a moment to process that he wasn't home at all. I texted, "Where are you?" The response came 20 minutes later. "At Vivian's, fell asleep watching movie, heading home now." He'd broken one of our primary rules, no overnight dates. When he came in at 2 a.m., I was waiting in the kitchen. "We said no sleepovers," I said, without preamble. "I know, I'm sorry, it wasn't planned. We were watching this documentary about World War II, and I guess I dozed off on her couch. When I woke up, it was so late I didn't want to drive." His explanation was reasonable, but something about it felt rehearsed. Or maybe I was looking for problems where none existed. Maybe I was feeling threatened by how easily he'd adapted to this new dynamic, while I'd expected him to struggle more. "Just stick to the rules, okay?" I said. "They're there for a reason. Of course, it won't happen again." But it did happen again, not the sleeping over. Walter was careful about that after our conversation, but other small infractions that felt like larger shifts. He started working late more often. Except when I called his office, he wasn't there. He'd mentioned places he'd been with Vivian that he'd never mentioned going. He bought new clothes without consulting me, started wearing cologne I'd never smelled before. The jewelry incident happened in April. I was looking for our insurance papers in Walter's desk drawer when I found the receipt. A pearl necklace from the jewelry store downtown. Expensive. More than he'd ever spent on a gift for me, including anniversaries. When I confronted him about it, he didn't deny it. It was Vivian's birthday, he said. I wanted to get her something nice. A pearl necklace? Walter, that's not casual dating money. That's serious relationship money. He was quiet for a long moment. Maybe it is becoming serious. The words hit me like ice water. What's that supposed to mean? I mean, I care about her more than I expected to. This wasn't part of the plan. The rules explicitly stated no emotional entanglements. I reminded him of this, and he nodded. I know what we agreed to, but feelings don't follow contracts, Pen. You know that. I wanted to argue, to insist he end things with Vivian immediately, but I could see in his face that it was too late. He'd already crossed the line we'd drawn, and there was no going back. May brought our 19th wedding anniversary, and for the first time in our marriage, Walter forgot. Not entirely. He remembered the morning of and picked up flowers from the grocery store on his way home from work. But there was no dinner reservation, no thoughtful gift, no acknowledgement that this day had once meant something special to both of us. I'm sorry, he said, handing me the slightly wilted bouquet. Work has been crazy, and He didn't finish the sentence, but I knew his attention was elsewhere. His emotional energy was being spent on someone else. That night, he kissed my cheek and went to the guest room without explanation. It was the first time he'd slept there, and somehow I knew it wouldn't be the last. I started paying closer attention after that, looking for signs of what I'd somehow missed. Walter's phone had a passcode now, something he'd never bothered with before. He took calls outside, claiming it was work even when they came on weekends. He mentioned fewer details about his dates with Vivian, as if he'd realized how much he'd been sharing. The distance between us grew wider even as we maintained the surface routines of marriage. We still had our scheduled date nights, but they felt forced, like performances we were both tired of giving. Walter would ask about my other relationships with polite interest, and I'd share carefully curated stories that made them sound more exciting than they actually were. The truth was, my own dating life had lost its appeal. The novelty had worn off, and I found myself comparing every man I met to Walter. Not favorably to him, but comparing nonetheless. Willem seemed shallow beside my husband's quiet intelligence. Carl was selfish in bed in a way that made me appreciate Walter's generosity. None of them made me laugh the way my husband used to, before he started saving his best jokes for someone else. In June, Chloe asked me why Daddy was always smiling at his phone, but seemed sad during family dinner. My 18-year-old daughter had noticed what I'd been trying not to see. Walter was happier away from us than with us. The realization was devastating. I started finding reasons to drive by the downtown library where Vivian worked, telling myself I was just curious about this woman who'd captured my husband's attention so completely. I saw her once standing outside the building during what must have been her lunch break. She was prettier than I'd imagined, but not dramatically so. Auburn hair, pleasant face, the kind of woman who looked comfortable in her own skin. She wore a sundress that flattered her figure without trying too hard, and she was reading while she ate a sandwich. Something about her self-possession irritated me. This was my competition. This ordinary woman who probably spent her weekends organizing her book collection and attending poetry readings? What did she have that I didn't? The answer came to me gradually, in pieces I didn't want to fit together. She had Walter's attention, his interest, his excitement about sharing his thoughts and experiences. She had the version of my husband I remembered from our early years together, before we'd settled into comfortable complacency. July brought the conversation I'd been dreading. Walter asked if we could talk after Chloe went to bed, using the same serious tone he'd had when we'd discussed opening our marriage in the first place. I knew, walking into our living room, that this wasn't going to be about adjusting our boundaries or renegotiating our rules. I think we need to close our marriage, I said, before he could speak, hoping to regain some control of the situation. I don't think that's going to solve our problem, Walter said gently. What problem? This was supposed to be an experiment. We can just go back to how things were before. Can we? He looked at me with something that might have been pity. Pen, when's the last time you looked at me the way you look at your phone when you're texting Willem? The question stung because I couldn't answer it honestly. This isn't about Willem. This is about you breaking our agreement with Vivian. You're right, I did break our agreement. I fell in love with her. There it was. The words I'd been dreading but expecting. Walter loved someone else. My husband, the father of my child, the man I'd shared nearly 2 decades with, loved someone else. So what are you saying? I managed to ask. I'm saying I want a divorce. The room seemed to tilt. Divorce. After all these years, after opening our marriage to save it, we were ending up in the place I'd been trying to avoid. You'd leave us for her? The question came out smaller than I'd intended. I'm not leaving Chloe. I'd never abandon my daughter. But yes, I want to be with Vivian. And I think you want to be free too, even if you won't admit it. He was right, which made it worse. I had been fantasizing about a life without the daily obligations of marriage, the compromises and negotiations and shared responsibilities. But I'd wanted it to be my choice, my decision. I'd wanted to be the one who left, not the one left behind. We told Chloe together the following week. She cried, asked if it was her fault, wanted to know if we could try counseling. Walter explained about growing apart, about wanting different things, about how sometimes people change in ways that make them incompatible. He didn't mention Vivian, but Chloe was 18, not 8. She'd figure it out eventually. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly amicable. Walter was generous with the settlement, agreeing to keep paying the mortgage until Chloe finished college so she wouldn't have to move. We agreed on joint custody, even though she'd be leaving for university in the fall. All very civilized and mature. I should have felt vindicated when, 6 months later, I heard through mutual friends that Walter and Vivian had moved in together. See, I wanted to say to anyone who'd listen. He left his family for his midlife crisis girlfriend. But the satisfaction I'd expected never came. Instead, I felt hollow, like I'd won an argument I'd forgotten the point of. Chloe spent equal time with both of us that summer before college, and I couldn't help but notice how comfortable she seemed at Walter's new apartment, how easily she accepted Vivian's presence, how she'd come home talking about dinners they'd cooked together or movies they'd watched. My daughter liked my replacement, which felt like a final betrayal. She's really nice, Mom, Chloe said one evening when I couldn't hide my irritation at another Vivian story. I know this is weird, but she makes Dad happy. Isn't that what you wanted? Was it? I'd wanted Walter to have some fun, to remember what it felt like to be desired, and then to come home grateful for what we had built together. I'd wanted him to play, not to find a new life. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness or the practical challenges of single life. It was the growing realization that I had engineered my own abandonment. I'd opened the door that led Walter away from our marriage, convinced I was sophisticated enough to handle the consequences. I'd underestimated how hungry we both were for genuine connection, how starved our relationship had become. Willem had ended things with me shortly after my separation became public. I don't want to be the reason a marriage ended, he'd said, though we both knew he wasn't. Carl had moved back to his home state. My dating life, which had seemed so promising and exciting during those first months of our open marriage, had dried up completely. I was alone in the house Walter and I had bought together, surrounded by the remnants of our shared life, trying to figure out who I was without the identity of wife and co-parent that had defined me for so long. A year later, Walter called to tell me he and Vivian were engaged. They wanted to have a small ceremony in the fall, and they hoped Chloe could be involved. He was calling to give me advance notice, he said, so I could prepare our daughter for the conversation. Congratulations, I said, and meant it more than I'd expected to. I hope you'll be very happy, thank you, Pen. That means a lot. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen, our kitchen, and tried to feel something other than exhausted. Anger would have been easier than this strange mix of regret and relief. I'd wanted Walter to be happy. I just hadn't expected his happiness to require leaving me behind. The wedding was beautiful, from what Chloe told me afterward. Small and intimate, held in the botanical garden where Walter and Vivian had had one of their early dates. Chloe served as Vivian's maid of honor, a detail that stung more than I'd anticipated. She asked me to call her Vivian, not Mama or anything like that, Chloe told me over dinner after the ceremony. She said she didn't want to replace you, just add to the family. Even in victory, Vivian was gracious. It was infuriating. 2 years have passed since Walter first mentioned Vivian's name. Our divorce has been final for 18 months. Chloe is thriving at college, splitting her time between my house and the home Walter has built with his new wife. She talks about both households with equal comfort, and I've stopped asking her not to mention Vivian in my presence. I've been dating again, more seriously this time. There's someone new, a kind man named George, who appreciates my independence and doesn't seem threatened by my past. We're taking things slowly, both having been burned by marriage before. Sometimes I wonder if I'm capable of the kind of deep partnership I had with Walter, or if I've become too self-protective, too aware of how quickly things can change. The other day, I ran into Vivian at the farmer's market. We exchanged pleasantries. She asked about my work. I inquired about Walter's health after he'd had a minor surgery. She was wearing the pearl necklace he'd given her for her birthday 3 years ago. And I noticed her wedding ring, a simple band that suited her better than my elaborate set had suited me. I hope you know I never intended for things to happen the way they did, she said, as we prepared to part ways. I know, I said, and realized I did know. Vivian hadn't stolen my husband. She'd simply been available when he was ready to be found by someone who saw him clearly. He talks about you sometimes, she continued, about the good years you had together. He wants you to be happy. I thanked her and walked away, carrying my bag of vegetables and the strange comfort of knowing that my ex-husband still cared about my well-being, even as he built a new life without me. That evening, I called Chloe at school. She was studying for finals, but had a few minutes to talk. She sounded happy, busy, fully engaged with her life, in a way that reminded me of myself at her age. Before I learned to measure my worth by my relationships. I'm proud of you, Mom, she said as we were ending the call. I know this hasn't been easy, but you're doing really well. Her words stayed with me as I made dinner for one, as I chose what to watch on Netflix without consulting anyone else's preferences, as I went to bed in the middle of our king-sized mattress because I could. I'm not the same woman who suggested opening our marriage 3 years ago. That Penelope was restless and bored, looking for external validation to fill an internal emptiness. She thought excitement and novelty were the same thing as fulfillment. She confused drama with passion, change with growth. This Penelope knows that you can't engineer love or manipulate connection. You can't open a door expecting to control who walks through it or where it leads. Sometimes the very thing you think will save your relationship becomes the thing that ends it. And sometimes ending is exactly what needs to happen. I don't regret suggesting we open our marriage, even knowing how it turned out. That decision revealed truths about both Walter and me that we'd been avoiding for years. We'd been coasting on history and shared obligations, mistaking familiarity for intimacy. We deserved better than that, and now we both have it. Walter found his better with Vivian. I'm still looking for mine, but I'm no longer afraid I won't recognize it when it comes. I know now that real connection can't be forced or manufactured. It happens when two people are brave enough to be fully themselves with each other, generous enough to celebrate each other's growth, even when it leads them in different directions. The guest bedroom door hasn't clicked shut in months now. The house is mine alone, filled with silence that no longer feels empty but peaceful. I'm learning to be complete by myself, which I never was before. Maybe that's what I needed to discover all along. Not how to fix my marriage, but how to be whole without one. Sometimes the door you open leads exactly where you need to go, even when it's not where you plan to end up.